in 2022, we had around, I think 90 applications per job. In 2024, we have around 200 applications per job. So which also tells how the market is really heated up. The biggest fail for me would be if I hire someone and I would need to let them go after a certain time, which of course you want to avoid, because that's a really costly process after all. There's always been more hiring for the mindsets rather than for the hard and technical skills.
So when, Artur, you think about hiring right now in the data space, in your view, what are the biggest challenges?
Yeah, so I think, there's two components to it. So first one is that we definitely want to hire like the right mindsets, like specifically about when talking about the data and talking about the tech. And that is finding people who are curious and also who have a good sense of ownership, which I think sometimes, could be lacking. And then collaboration. Of course, you're looking for somebody who is a team player, because I've also seen use cases when people are, really good experts, but they can't really, work in a team or can't really share and spread the knowledge. So that is one, is definitely about the mindset and the values, so to say. And secondly, I also think that the companies, so the era of like really hyped growth, I think is not there anymore. So you really need to hire consciously and sustainably, after all, because I mean, just to give you some examples. So for instance, back in 2022, we had around, I think 90 applications per job. In 2024, we have around 200 applications per job. So which also tells how the market is really heated up. And in some of my previous experience, I've been also hiring analytical teams through multiple different locations. But then it's not happening that fast anymore, right? So really people, and the teams, you're trying to be more conscious about, who you hire, what kind of impact does it bring, how you can particularly maximize sort of like the effort and bring the best value to the company. So I think these are the two things that really shape a bit of the hiring landscape right now.
And so you mentioned a few things there around the mindset that you typically look for these characters: curiosity, ownership, collaboration. Is it currently more difficult to find that than it was a couple of years ago, or it's kind of an ongoing challenge that's always a sort of skill set that's in shortage?
No, I think it's not particularly in shortage, but right now, also given if you have a lot of candidates that you need to seem through, you really need to look out for this particular one. And it's trying to devise, some of the cases that can help, bring this up. But ultimately, some of the things is easier to test in a way when you do the interview, when you do some of the talks. Some of them is quite more complicated too. And I think it's just the role of the hiring manager to really set up what is most importantly in the candidates and sort of set up the guidelines at the beginning of the process, right? Also together with some of the company values that somebody might have. So that'd be kind of a guidance that you need to set up beforehand as well.
And so setting that up beforehand, I guess, is part of what you mentioned around kind of consciously thinking about the process, which is not diving into it in maybe the hyper growth stage where it's like, we just need to hire 10 people, get them as quickly as possible. This is more a considered approach where you've almost thought ahead of what exactly you need. And then it's, I guess, a case of designing the process to hit that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can also give an example. So when I was working in the company, like there had like also different like offices around. So like they said, was one in Berlin, there was one in Singapore, and we also had to hire a lot more data professionals. So I also couldn't keep track. I was not hiring all of them, but I also couldn't keep track who was getting hired in like different locations because there was such a fast-paced environment, such a fast hyper growth, really. And at some point, like you like, okay, oh, you have a new joiner, right? So like, how do you make sure that they also integrated, into the team itself? How do they follow, let's say, what are the best practices in a way? And that was also quite challenging because you do need to spend a lot of time on onboarding an individual. So I think right now is like definitely is more prudent. I mean, it's more, as I said, conscious hiring in a way. Yeah, because also the budget, I think, is getting a bit smaller as well. I mean, you definitely need to We all want to hire actually, the best professionals on the market. But given also the market is like quite heated up, you do need to look over a lot of the different applications and make sure this is the best pick for your organization. And the process is more thoughtful than I think it used to be before.
And for some of those particular mindset characteristics, if you will, the curiosity, the ownership, the collaboration, you mentioned you typically evaluate that during the interview process. Are there certain ways, like if you think back now to the candidates who did well or didn't do well, are there certain ways they would or would not demonstrate those things in an interview, like certain, I don't know, red or green flags?
I think, well, if I look back on some of the experience, and also, yeah, I most interview for the data roles, but also am sometimes interview for tech roles, or like helping out my other colleagues who was interview for different positions, like head of engineer, different, let's say, software engineers as well. I think for me, it had been almost primarily often about the ways that the person communicate and how they able to structure the thought and the whole thought process, and of course, having that communication around clear message, and also the message as they can adapt to different audience, which is rather simple. I mean, it sounds really simple, but let's say if they're like security engineer, like explaining to me some of the really maybe complicated protocols for security, which I don't really know about, and they don't really realize that. Because I'm not an expert on security as such, right? And they don't really adapt the message. So I'm like thinking, okay, how that would be easy or hard for them to really, communicate it to the business stakeholder, right? I mean, I still kind of understand, of course, but like they might have been complicated for a different audience. So I think, people who can really tailor the message, who could show the way that they think generally, what is the thought process behind that? So, I mean, they definitely have more advantage. Also, on the other side of the coin, so there was some asking for some examples. I recall there was a candidate for one of the positions who had, I think, maybe more than 20 years in software engineering. But the way that person came, to the interview was like, is a bit more like, was an attitude like, well, I know everything, right? I kind of like, I know everything. I've done that. I know that you might ask, whatever. So it was like really, that a bit intimidating, like was that experience, but also saying like, I'm not really flexible in my mindset because I already know it all, right? So like ultimately, I mean, I said no to that particular application because I mean, it would be really hard to collaborate with the group, of people who actually are curious and want to learn more from each other, right? I mean, and rather spread the knowledge than being flexible also to change their mind as well.
Yeah, so there's a bit of humility there. There's a bit of a need for, as you say, kind of teamwork and sharing your skills with others. And so that's really interesting that some candidates maybe can't necessarily do that, even if they have the right skills and clearly demonstrate the right skills. If they don't have those other pieces, it's hard to make a hire. You mentioned in passing that there's been an increase in the volume of candidates. Of course, mapping to the market, the fact that unemployment's maybe a little bit higher, there's been some layoffs. So now there's a higher volume of candidates per position. Has that caused any challenges in the screening stages, or are you changing the way you would screen candidates in those early stages of hiring?
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned, definitely the amount of application had gone up. It definitely puts a strain on you as a hiring manager and the recruitment partner that you have, because you definitely need to go through more things. But of course, using some more, processes perhaps to automate. But nevertheless, I mean, even myself will go over 100 applications, and the thing is like you need to trim your ears, and our eyes really to look out for what stands out. And it is really challenging sometimes, because in the end, how do you know that you didn't miss any, let's say, gold nugget in like, the pile of those CVs after all. So I think the process, it takes more longer, of course. And I would also prefer, to go through like those applications to know like, okay, so let's maybe talk to that or that individual. So say like from the perspective of the time that is being used, it definitely had increased. And generally the hiring process, I mean, it's not an easy, well, I mean, it's not as sometimes often straightforward process because it takes like different multiple stages as well. And you, as the hiring manager, is also the one who's helping setting up like how many that stages will be, how the whole thing will go. And it could take from, luckily maybe 1 month to like multiple months to hire a really fitting candidate as well.
One thing we've noticed over the past few years is that the hiring process itself and the speed is directly determined in some part by the current market conditions. So we would have seen, I'd say, like peak zero interest rate, COVID expansion in Australia, maybe like 2021, where companies were hiring crazily. And in Australia, we had a weird situation where we had the borders shut. So we had no migration. And in the tech community in particular, we rely heavily on skilled migrants. I'd say the vast majority actually would be skilled migrants rather than local born Australians. And so it created a weird market condition whereby, there were like thousands of software engineering ads and like 3 out of work software engineers. So it created this strange condition where then companies are like, well, let's get rid of this interview, let's get rid of this test, let's just hire as soon as possible. Have you seen a kind of reversal whereby there's now maybe a bit more risk aversion? You can be a little bit pickier. Maybe you can make a slightly longer process, to get slightly more certainty in who you're hiring. Is that what you've seen play out?
So I think that definitely changes like from who is hiring, like for which different positions. As an example, there could be something really niche, like security engineers, as an example. I mean, I have sometimes a really specific, skill sets, which is really hard to find on the market. At the same time, there's also different locations. So for instance, within my company, we hire also in Valencia. So we have a tech hub in Spain. But also I felt there were challenges in, let's say, having like knowing the local market, because I don't really particularly know, Valencia market, which sometimes is also challenging to find the candidates there as well, or if they're targeting like some, institutions, universities and like, schools, like for fresh graduates, but depending on the level. But I think to answer your question as well on these stages, I mean, that really, it really depends like from the position that somebody's hiring for. We have, not too many. And I've seen that at the beginning, like we did also, for instance, ask the candidates to solve the case study. But that would take also like some more time really. And I think nobody wants to really invest the time in their whole takeaway case study anymore. So we took it back, we took it away. Now the process is a bit more linear. We also seen the general increase of satisfaction rates among the candidates regarding the whole process over the past couple of years as well. So now also trying to condense a lot of the interviews within maybe like one day. So you have a technical interview, you might have like some architecture design interview and some kind of collaboration principles, like cultural fit, let's say, interview as well, like within one day, and then basically giving an answer hopefully similar to the candidates. And I think what the candidates also really value, they really value the transparency. So not only, of course, like, the amount of the stages they have to go through. This definitely has to be there. But also it's about like, what can they expect in the job, how they can, grow, what technology do they use, how they can progress, within the career framework. And we also try to demonstrate that through, public career framework, that they can, take a look into, the tech radar, showing the technology that we use as well. So to see this is really even exciting for them to work within the same environment.
Yeah, I feel like transparency over the job and hiring process is probably one of the lowest hanging bits of fruit that a company could invest in to encourage candidates to A, apply, and then B, continue in the process. Because a typical job ad is devoid of really anything. It's just like a bunch of tools, a bunch of requirements, often a generic sounding description. And it's so predictable. You've done hiring enough, it's so predictable what candidates are interested in. They'll always or typically ask that in that first interview call. So if companies can kind of package that up front and tell people exactly what the remuneration is, what's the bonus scheme, are there any share options, what's a day in the life of their team, who do they work with, as you say, the tools and technologies that are actually used, what their metrics are, how their career can grow. If companies can just package that early on in the process, I think candidates are going to be much happier to kind of continue through and to see it to fruition. Can I ask you a little bit about AI? Because, how could we not discuss AI? Have you seen it so far impact the hiring process? For example, we hear a lot about potentially candidates using it to create a CV, to apply for jobs. What have you seen so far?
Yeah, so I think definitely for CV, text, application, which I think makes total sense. And it's definitely, it's great to use the technology. I mean, it's also important to use that sort of responsibly, right? Like after all, I mean, you can do it for multiple things, right? You can definitely just apply it like for, can you help me with the CV just to make it, brighter in a way, and also on the technical tasks. But also within the same time, first that we don't really do like home takeaway study now anymore. So which is, it would be harder for you to really do this with the AI, of course. But then it's more about the thinking process that we ask, people to, let's say, even when in like technically discuss or like trying to, maybe like drive some like architecture diagram as an example, right? So and a bit less that you can do like with the AI, maybe like in real time. Yes, sure, of course, but still, I think it's a challenge. And I think like, people, if they use that, that is totally fine, right? You need to know how to use that properly. You need to use that, how to maximize those chances. If you're not using AI, I mean, I don't think you maximize your chances enough. That's for sure. And I think we still should be more on the lookout for, the thinking process, right? And it's basically, not how exactly did you got to that answer, but what exactly is the thinking process that took you there. I think that's what we all as the hiring manager are really looking out more. So AI cannot really substitute that because that's something on your own, I think. But if people use that and use it responsibly, I think why not? There's no harm in it.
Is there any bit of the hiring process that if a candidate had used ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, that you would think, oh, I really rather wish you'd done this yourself. Like this doesn't give me a true picture of who you are. Is there anything that you feel like at the moment is off limits?
Yeah, I think no, definitely would think about that, right? Because if we would, let's say, see, the use and a person says like this is completely, mine own, genuine idea as an example, right? So there'd be something that you will not have really this trust created. If you don't have the trust created, like of course you'll not be able, to hire that person. But maybe I would then, talk again and like, try to look into the different use case without the use of AI and see like how that like thought process really differs in the end. Are they able to come up with the, seemingly, well, similar answer, let's say, or not as well? But so far, I haven't seen really any gross, big manipulations, let's say, with the AI technology that people would really present some of those like generated ideas as their own. Yeah, I think it's also all about the humility. I mean, I remember when I was interviewing for one of the positions, and it was like a case study, like it was the home away, you take home case study. So, and I did some mistake or like I did some assumption that was pretty, bold. And I didn't understand like why was the reason the particular product was built that way. But then I realized, okay, maybe there's a reason that they don't really understand why this is built this way. So I really toned that down. And I said, okay, so maybe you should actually consider, this particular thing. And then I realized there was a really legit reason that they couldn't like really allow, let's say, signups in the application, to that matter. And I think with that kind of a bit more, being more humble, not really, yeah, thinking that, oh no, I know the answer completely. I don't know why you're doing this in a way, right? So just like thinking about the thought process, presenting that in a way, it really helps also to assess, yourself as the, suitable candidate, and then the, really like have, answers to all of the questions. And I think that is absolutely okay to accept as well.
It's really interesting that you say that, okay, you're more interested in the candidate's thought process than maybe the final destination or the final output. And certainly in an interview, they'd have a chance to have a discussion, and that's where the thought process would come out, because you can kind of dig. Hard for that to come across in a test or a CV or anything earlier, but in an interview, I guess it's easier. One thing I was thinking about recently was that, a lot of software engineers, probably data scientists as well, would say that it's almost like they think as they're coding. The coding process itself is like them solving the problem. I've heard other people say that writing is thinking, because you take these jumbled up ideas from your head and commit them to paper. And it's only once you've written it with a hand or with a typewriter or whatever, or keyboard, I should say, that really those ideas become fully formed. Given now we're using a Claude, a ChatGPT to prompt, where in a sense it's kind of doing the thinking, we're almost doing like a meta level of thinking. Is that a concern that we're going to lose something, that maybe we're not thinking through the problem solving enough because we're outsourcing it to an LLM? What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think it's a really good argument, and yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we're not going to lose that completely, right? But we definitely will dull that sense of thinking in a solution-based problem. Even I sometimes, look at myself. I try to. Well, I definitely don't use that for everything, right? But like, of course, it's easier just generally to submit a prompt and then give an answer, right? And they kind of like quiz through, right? Or search, and then instead of like doing the search, you use the ChatGPT, like raw, examples like. So I think that yeah, we do like dull some of the senses of like the problem solving if we turn to the prompting all of the time. We could also argue that there will be more of, let's say, like we solve really simple problems, but like with more complex one, let's say, we still like, involve our own thinking and such, because it does require a chain of different prompts, response, like dialogue and such, which is also fair, I think. Ultimately, what is important that we don't really lose that sense completely, and we still, think about the complex problems. And then there is like multiple other sources that we just turn to instead of just submitting the prompt as well. But yeah, that's a really good point.
So I guess, yeah, we just need to develop a good understanding through time of each tool has its own job and when we should and should not use this particular tool versus another one. I guess that will evolve as the tool evolves as well, probably.
Yeah, and it also evolved quite fast, I think. So I mean, if talking about AI, perhaps general intelligence might come as well, maybe a couple of years, right? At the same time, there's other different things. The tools are using for different purposes. After all, I mean, like as technology evolves, I think we also have to evolve, in terms of our thinking as individuals. So that's my take on that.
Yeah. What about in terms of your hiring experience as a hiring manager? Any big fails, any regrets that you have, or perhaps any fails you've seen, at least in your team or organization, which you look back and go, oh, well, we should have done things differently then?
Yeah, I think, well, definitely one of the challenge, let's say, if you really do the hyper growth in some of the companies, is that it's really hard to control, let's say, the maybe the quality of the candidates who come in, right? At the same time as you really need at the given time somebody new, that might be quite challenging. But also, I think you should have a lot more trust in your colleagues to say, these are the people who are empowered to take decisions, right? I don't really need to be involved in every part of the process. Um, but as to like actual fails, I mean, I hate to disappoint, but I didn't have this specifically. I would think that, of course, the biggest fail for me would be if I hire someone and I would need to let them go after a certain time, which of course you want to avoid, because it's a really costly process after all. But I think most importantly, like what the companies had adopted right now as well, that prevents that from happening quite often, is that even you as the hiring manager, I mean, you take, of course, like the last decision, but there's like so many processes in place, before that. So, the person interview with the team, the person interviews with another team member, maybe from a different department for some, values of the company. There's like some leadership interview, different if it's about the managerial position as well. So the thing is like what I'm trying to say, it's hard to go wrong right now. Like even if I am, let's say, really stubborn, a hiring manager said like, I want to hire the person regardless, right? But if I have, some of the red flags that were raised during the process, like about some other colleagues of mine, I definitely would think, twice about that, which is good because it doesn't really, like rest all of the power in only me, like to really make the decision. Of course, even though I have it, but like I still have an input from different people. So which means that in this case that, the project, the process, sorry, is a bit more objective in a way. So you really avoid, let's say, hiring, not people who are not fitting that particularly. Um, And I think, and maybe another story that was more of, it was kind of like a funny story when I recall it. And that was particularly from the interview process that I had, also myself as the candidate. Well, even more so, I remember I left the company like, a couple of months ago, well, one of the companies, and then I got offered my own position back, which was really strange at the same time. And I mean, and I saw that the person did not really do any research, that I was actually working there as well. And I'm like, do you know that this is particular, my position, my department? I mean, like you could have looked up in my LinkedIn. I mean, it's just like there. So like, oh, maybe you want it, whatever. So there was no zero research done whatsoever, just reaching out to people, out of that blue. And I was like, oh my God, I mean, that is so random. But that was like some of this, strange experience when you got offered your own position back to you, like, what if you left the company just a couple of months before. I mean, that was really fun.
So yeah, back to your point around hiring fails, in your case, the lack thereof. So it sounds like there's an almost wisdom of the crowds effect, where if you get enough people involved, all looking for the same types of things, eventually the candidate would slip up in terms of any red flags. It's like someone's going to find some reason to say no. So it's almost like a process optimized to reduce the chance of a bad hire. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, yeah. I think, of course, I mean, still you can't account for everything, right? I mean, even if there's, candidates are technically sound, like they show like good collaboration modes, but then they come up in the team and they, for instance, they are not engaged, they're not interested as much, right? How would you be able to also find that during the interview process? Maybe there's some, examples that I don't really know about, some approaches to identify that. But, people can also suddenly lose the interest. They might also take them, I don't know, like too much time to really, relocate to the example or move, or start like working in the company, things change. And that could be a challenge, right? So I think, of course, we try to safeguard and do as much as possible, to hire the right fit. But sometimes it doesn't really work out. So I mean, you have only a couple of choices in this example. Yeah.
And did you notice during those hyper growth periods where you were just hiring like crazy, and, maybe in those situations, the process wasn't followed to the T, the process is probably shorter. As you said, it's happening in different countries, different people are involved. Did you notice generally a sort of higher rate during those times compared to now?
I think, yeah, that was also happening. You could say that as well. What that also led to, I mean, like people will also reshuffle between different areas of expertise, well, areas of responsibility mostly. So as if you have, a person, a candidate, maybe not as strong, technically, but they are in charge for a really big domain, you would say, okay, let's try to reshuffle that to a smaller one, after all. But also there's a lot of like context switching. There's a lot of, specific knowledge maybe that needed to be um, applied when it's talking about the product as well. But yeah, there definitely was the benchmark. I mean, it definitely was kind of a different rate of the candidates. If you hire super fast and you cut on processes, I mean, this is what you get.
You make an interesting point there, though, that maybe thinking about it now, it's not that helpful to think of it binary as like regretted or not regretted, because you just mentioned that actually you can move them into another team, which, thinking about it now, maybe is especially likely if you're hyper growing. There's always opportunities, there's always new jobs being created. So maybe if there's just like some slight issue with a skill set they were missing or a mindset thing, that actually they could do a great job, but they just need to be in a slightly different role.
Yeah, that also could be the case, right? And I think like the skill set in terms of, technical one, I mean, it's something you can always learn. The skill set in terms of, well, the mindsets, we'll say the mindset. I mean, as you know, which is far more complicated, to learn because it takes more time to really, adopt the habits or, change the mindset really. And I think it's fair to say that we, like, as hiring managers are trying to look for the mindset, particularly that really fits, the company, that fits, let's say, the current needs, in a way that also fits, let's say, the way that, you can work with other people in general. So there's always been more hiring for the mindsets rather than for the hard and technical skills.
So then, thinking more broadly about all the candidates that you've interviewed, over your career, which must be in the hundreds, I'm guessing by now. Um, if you had to separate them or think about, what differentiates the successful from unsuccessful, it sounds like the mindset piece and some of those things around curiosity, ownership, collaboration, are they the more common reasons people fall down, or there are some other reasons?
No, I think like for me was definitely more about how they are persevere, how they really like go through with the challenges. And I mean, one example I can also give, I remember interviewing the candidates, like years back, that we were also asking for like some technical case study for analytics back then. But then the candidates didn't know, like for instance, like Python or like much SQL, but then they were able to still build this case study using Excel, pretty simple actually. And they had like that really urge. They had that like really the necessity, they wanted to really work in the company. They really showed everything they got. And I think this person is still like working in the company, already in the managerial position as well. I mean, the technical skill was not a problem. I mean, you can do like with everything, something different completely, like a different tool, not really knowing whatever some frameworks and, technology, but that whole, the mindset, first of all, I mean, definitely. And then sort of like the desire as well, that perseverance, I mean, really showed up, I mean, and paid off eventually. So that is something really great. And I think that's which makes more difference then.
Yeah, and I guess in their case, it also required you and the other hiring team to have an open mind that wasn't like, you must do this with Python with this particular package. You're more thinking about, as you said, how do they think about the problem? How do they solve the problem, as opposed to solving it with X, Y, Z?
Yeah, it's about the thought process, I think. And it's about like sparring, it's about like brainstorming, and you don't have the answers always to those questions, right? But this is like for you to collaborate with people to generate some of like those ideas as well. And often, this is not something that is developed in isolation, after all, right? I mean, like you are not, even if you are individual contributor, right? Which is normally, this is the name of the title, but you always collaborate with other people. And I think this is where the place some of the ideas really are being generated. And you can solve some of the complex problems.
Thinking about hiring in general, my view is that the way hiring's traditionally done can be quite subjective, not necessarily fair. I feel like often the best candidate might ultimately not be the one who gets hired. And there's some interesting and quite compelling research around things like, and these have been done in various countries, applying with CVs to hundreds of different roles where the only difference in the CV is the name. So in Australia, there's been an interesting study using Chinese or non-Chinese names and measuring the callback rate. And it shows that quite often, basically, if you don't have the right name, you're not getting a callback as often as you do. So I feel like there's a lot of things in hiring that are quite endemically unfair. Have you seen any examples, any kind of tactics to make hiring a little bit more objective, a little bit fairer?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, in Germany, what I've seen that nobody attaches also a picture to your CV. That there is no even ways to objectify. Regarding the also the, let's say, the race, I mean the gender, after all, which is good. I think sometimes you don't really know who also you speak to, right? So and then basically what you only look into is the text. What are the kind of the credentials, to say what are the experiences, after all, what are the projects that a person had done, right? How do they also able to package all of that information? Because this is, of course, a lot, about of years of experience into one concise matter. So there's definitely one thing that I've seen. Let's think about some other things. It's really hard to be objective. I think we try to be as objective as we can. I mean, and let's also accept that that we also make mistakes as humans, because ultimately, we are the human in the loop process, and there's something that we can't really avoid often, of being like truly objective. Yes.
You mentioned human in the loop. Do you feel like AI will be taking care of more and more hiring soon, and a human might be there just to, as you say, be in the loop and check a few things to make sure they're going okay? Or do you think we'll keep doing it in quite a human process?
No, I think it will still be, human will still be in process, right? But like we already see, and already have been happening, not only, with the recent rise more of LLMs, but generally, even a couple of years back, right? The whole like screening process for sure is more automated. And that is like really looking out for the things that you need in the candidate or like you set up as the goal. Um, so inadvertently, yes, I think there'll be more really, let's say, AI being used in the process as well. But we as humans, we still want to have control for sure. So I can imagine, us like still saying, actually, I want to make, decision that I want to really validate, because I really want to make sure that we don't really miss out anything, right? But it definitely would be more on the rise. I can tell you that.
Do you think it's a case of humans being overconfident in our ability to kind of intuit things and go, I have a gut feeling this is the right person. And maybe eventually the data or AI will prove, no, actually, if you just remove yourself from it, the end outcome is going to be better. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think, as a human nature, perhaps we'll like to fight the decision of an AI, and we say, no, by the way, I know better because of like my years of experience, and machine cannot really, label that properly. So yeah, I think there'd be definitely some skepticism and generally perception to say like, no, I really need to revalidate that again. So I can see that happening. And yeah, I think, we make mistakes as humans, right? But we also don't want to really acknowledge that we make those mistakes. The same thing as, with the AI makes mistakes. I mean, it sometimes does not. Technology makes mistakes because it hallucinates, right? Um, but I think as humans, it's hard for us to accept our own mistakes really and acknowledge them as well. So we will perhaps, try to fight off and say, well, no, by the way, I mean, I think I made the right decision. And then they kind of like try to justify it as well.
I was thinking about something just this weekend, comparing hiring to the way recruitment has been done in football, like soccer football. And it was, I reckon, only 10, maybe 12 years ago that English Premier League footballers, when they had an injury and had an issue, were flying off to Serbia to get a witch doctor to feed them horse placenta to fix their injuries. That was only a decade ago that was happening. Of course, now there's a lot more science involved, a lot more data involved in how they recover from injuries and how they go through their day. I wonder whether we'll look back on the way we do hiring now in 10 years and it will seem just as crazy as the Premier League footballers going to a witch doctor to have their injuries fixed.
Well, I think, maybe in 10 years, we really come back to the, origins in a way. And we say like, we need like, a person in the loop, like for every single step as well, right? It's just, we as humanity maybe reinvent a couple of things, but then we also, come back to other things originally because they're more comforting. They're also more known to us, but also on the other side, there might be like, rediscovery of like, oh, by the way, it was not as bad. Let's say we thought it was, it didn't really need, maybe like another improvement. Um, Ultimately, it's hard to predict what's going to be like in 10 years with the recruitment. Generally, I mean, people, the skills will evolve, of like individuals and candidates who apply, and already is. And also for some of the positions, you need sometimes, like maybe use of newer, different technologies, like more general, and AI and everything else, right? So I think as candidates evolve, we also have to evolve also together as interviewers, also become better in the way that we talk to people, understand, how we can recognize the bias, trying to be more objective as well. So it's a constant learning, right? And which is good to really try to, figure out what works, what's not for you and your organization, and how you can adapt to the challenges of the market as well.
Are there any particular elements of hiring that you think could be improved with data, like measuring a new thing, like creating a new metric, or with AI or anything in between?
So definitely looking at the data statistics. I mean, of what is the, let's say, acceptance rate generally. How you do in individual steps of the process. What's the candidate um, satisfaction rate? So, for instance, we had quite like a satisfaction rate. I think was way lower, about like 60%, like 3 years ago, and I was at 82%, which is good. There's definitely some room to grow. Sorry, and I think one of those reasons is because of like transparency we give to the candidates now more often what they can expect, in a given role. But there's a lot of things that you can definitely measure throughout the process. And myself being a data person, I definitely would say, okay, we can optimize at this stage. There's more optimization to be done at the offer stage. So what we do is we also, discuss once per quarter with our like tech recruitment partners, and then just look over some data, like, so how many people did we hire in the end? What's acceptance rate? What's the process? How long did it take? And then try to make some, optimizations on the base of that and get more people involved, or, like cut down on some things as well. So there's always constant learning and constant optimization involved.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you've taken your data hat and applied it to hiring. And I've heard similar stories from a few people in different companies who've kind of taken it on their own to look at their hiring funnel, because it's basically a funnel like any other marketing funnel, do that kind of conversion rate optimization you mentioned. I feel like as I hear these stories, it's normally data and tech people applying what is almost second nature to them to hiring. And if I think about all the talent acquisition and HR teams around the world, a lot of the people working in there don't necessarily come from a data or technical background. On average, the vast majority wouldn't. Do you feel like sometimes there might be a lack of data skills in talent and HR teams that would allow them to do this kind of analysis as almost like a second nature in a way that it isn't at the moment?
Well, I think that's something you can definitely collaborate with them, right? I mean, it's not necessarily that everybody should have the same set of skills, but I mean, as you are as the hiring manager, are asking those kind of questions and maybe guiding them, what would be interesting to look into, right? Like what will help me to optimize that particular aspect of hiring. So I think it's a common sparring, so to say. I mean, it's generally like a common brainstorming that you go through together, try to see like what we can do best, because like two parties that are interested and you don't really act alone as well.
What about hiring heroes? Is there anyone who you can think of throughout your career who you learned a lot about hiring from? And if not, what would a hiring hero look like? Like what would be this kind of mythical superhero character who does hiring in an amazing way?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question. Well, I think definitely one of the hiring heroes was in my current company. As one talent acquisition partner, like his name is Florian, and I think he'd been interviewing like for so many different positions, generally like in tech, and we have like partner management and other different departments. And I think what I can definitely see, is building up a lot of this context around the rules and expectations, like within so many different departments, because not really focusing on particularly, one, let's say, given function, but there's multiple of them, and definitely interviewed a lot of people, and brought a lot of people on board. And I think what the hiring hero would have is that perhaps, well, I kind of want to say that they are really good communicators, right? They really can, get to people. They can really get, just good chat with them, understanding exactly what they need, what we can offer, like also establishing the trust and transparency at the same time. And most importantly, recognizing their own biases as well during the interview process. I think that is also really important, that we often overlook the same time. So these are the people who really are, committed, who can establish really good relationship with the candidates, who can really, outline them the process exactly fully. So, and so they have, trust, and what can they expect. I think that what actually matters with the candidates.
Is there anything else you'd like to chat about?
The hiring is complicated. I think we have also to adapt all of the time to the market, to the conditions, to the candidates, adapt our skills, never stop learning as well of how do we use, technology, how we get to learn people, try to paint really accurate picture to the candidates we're dealing with. And generally now is good that there's more people involved than so in the process itself. So it's really, of course, you make mistakes. We all make mistakes, and we should, be really transparent about them as well. But by having, your team of talented acquisition partners, other people who interview you from your department as well, I think you try to minimize as much as possible, of like, hiring like a different bad candidate as an example doesn't really fit your organization, which is great because you're not really alone within that tedious process of hiring, and it definitely can take a lot of effort from you as an individual.
Fantastic.